The Dakota Territory wind howled across the frozen prairie like a pack of starving wolves battering the small log cabin where 16-year-old Hazel Whitcomb knelt beside dying embers. She clutched her father's worn wool coat, breathing in the faint scent of pine sap and tobacco that carried memories of countless evenings when Walter had taught her to track animals through snow and understand why a person's word mattered more than gold. "Remember, Hazel," he would say, his weathered hands gentle as he helped her practice reading from his leather Bible. "A man's honor is all he truly owns. Promise me you'll always choose truth over safety, even when it costs everything." Those words felt like echoes from another lifetime now. 3 bitter February days had passed since Walter rode to the Silver Spur mine for his weekly timber inspection. As the mine safety officer, he examined underground supports to prevent cave-ins work that made enemies among supervisors who viewed worker protection as an expensive obstacle to profit. The cabin felt hollow without his presence. Walter had been both father and mother to Hazel since her mama died of fever when she was 10. He'd taught her to read by lamplight, to shoot straight when prairie wolves threatened their chickens, to judge character by watching how people treated those weaker than themselves. Now the silence pressed against her like a living thing, broken only by wind rattling the shutters and her own anxious breathing. Sharp knocking echoed against her oak door. She lifted the iron latch to find a man in a tattered cavalry coat astride a frost-covered horse. His face remained hidden beneath his hat's wide brim, and he offered no greeting or explanation. Something about his rigid posture and the way he kept glancing over his shoulder suggested he wanted this encounter finished quickly. Without ceremony, he thrust a folded letter bearing an official red wax seal into her trembling hands. Before she could speak, he wheeled his mount and vanished into the white curtain of blizzard, leaving only hoofprints that disappeared within seconds. Hazel's fingers shook as she broke the seal, her heart already racing with dread. The words struck like physical blows. By order of Judge Harrison Fletcher of the Dakota Territorial Circuit Court, Walter Whitcomb is hereby sentenced to hang at sunrise on February 23, 1879, for the willful murder of Jonah Dairy Foreman of the Silver Spur mine. This sentence to be carried out in Crow's Landing by Sheriff Harlan Pike. The letter fluttered from her numb hands to the rough wooden floor. Her father, gentle Walter, who read her bedtime stories from Scripture, who bandaged her scraped knees with infinite patience, who never raised his voice even when she accidentally freed their chickens and they scattered across 3 counties condemned to death for murder. The notion seemed as impossible as rivers flowing uphill. Yet the official seal appeared genuine to her untrained eyes. Terror squeezed her chest like iron bands, making each breath a struggle. In her isolated frontier world, she understood little of legal procedures beyond the basic truth that territorial judges wielded absolute authority over life and death. If this document was authentic, sunrise tomorrow would bring her father's execution. The thought made her knees buckle, and she gripped the back of their wooden chair to keep from falling. How could a 16-year-old girl alone in the wilderness challenge the machinery of territorial justice itself? A familiar voice called through the howling wind. "Hazel, child, we saw the messenger approach your cabin." His horse carried the urgent speed of dark news. She opened the door to discover 2 Lakota men standing in the snow, like carved statues, their breath creating white clouds in the bitter air. Hosa, an elderly chief with silver braids draped over a bone breastplate, carried himself with the accumulated wisdom of 7 decades. Eagle feathers adorned his traditional headdress, and his dark eyes held knowledge of both human nobility and the depths of cruelty men could reach. Beside him stood Takoda, a warrior of perhaps 25 summers carrying a Spencer rifle with the easy familiarity of someone who had learned to shoot before he could properly walk. He wore practical buckskins mixed with frontier clothing that spoke of a man comfortable in both worlds. What news brings riders in such weather? Hosa asked in careful English, his accent carrying his native tongue's melodic rhythm, while his eyes already showed he feared the answer. Her voice cracked as she showed them the execution letter, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold the document steady. Takoda's jaw tightened into a hard line, while Hosa examined the red wax seal with the intensity of someone who had learned through bitter experience to distrust official documents without careful scrutiny. "This grieves my spirit more deeply than winter grief," Hosa said, handling the letter with reverence for its terrible power, while his weathered features showed both sorrow and growing anger. "Your father Walter signed the water treaty with my people 3 summers past, during the time when the drought threatened both our peoples. We share the Ash River settlers, and Lakota both draw from its flow for crops, livestock, and survival itself. That legal deed was witnessed at the Jesuit mission and properly filed with territorial authorities according to white man's law." Takoda nodded grimly, snow gathering on his black hair like premature age. "Gideon Vale, the mine superintendent, has coveted that water exclusively for his operations since the day your father's ink dried on that treaty. He's attempted breaking the agreement before claiming your father exceeded his authority in signing for other settlers. But Walter's signature was legal and binding. But why frame him for murder?" Hazel whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that seemed to carry the question away before it could be answered. "Because Walter Whitcomb alive means shared water rights remain protected by federal treaty law," Hosa explained with a teacher's patience, though his eyes blazed with understanding of the conspiracy's cruel logic. "Walter Whitcomb dead means the treaty dies with its primary signatory, and Vale seizes everything for his mining operations. Water means more than gold in this territory." Before she could fully absorb this chilling revelation, the thunder of multiple horses approached through the storm, and their hoofbeats muffled by snow, but growing closer with menacing intent. 3 riders materialized from the white curtain like vengeful phantoms, their faces wrapped against the brutal cold, but their hostile intent unmistakable. The leader raised his rifle with practiced ease and fired a shot through the cabin door, sending wood splinters flying past Hazel's head to strike the wall behind her with sharp cracks. "Stay inside where you belong, girl," he shouted through the wind, his voice carrying the harsh authority of men accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Morning comes early for those fool enough to meddle in murderers' affairs. Ain't no business for children." Takoda dropped to one knee in a fluid motion that spoke of years of warfare, shouldered his Spencer rifle with practiced grace, and fired one precisely aimed shot that spoke volumes about his skill. The bullet struck the frozen ground directly between the lead rider's horse and its companions, sending up a spray of ice and dirt that caused all 3 animals to rear and dance nervously in the swirling snow. The demonstration of accuracy was unmistakable. The next shot would not be a warning. The precise marksmanship convinced the men to wheel their mounts and disappear back into the storm. But their violent message had been delivered with crystal clarity. Questioning Walter's fate would bring immediate and brutal consequences to anyone brave or foolish enough to try. They fear exposure of truth more than winter cold. Hosa observed, helping Hazel to her feet with gentle strength that steadied both her body and her shaken nerves. "Men speaking honestly don't threaten children with violence or ride away from fair confrontation. This confirms your father's innocence beyond any doubt in my heart." Takoda examined the letter closely, running his calloused finger along the red wax impression, while his expression grew increasingly grim. "During last summer's land dispute over my band's grazing rights near Eagle Fork, I spent days in the territorial courthouse observing legal proceedings. I observed several official documents from Judge Fletcher's court during those long, tedious sessions. His official seals invariably used distinctive blue wax, imported specially from Denver, never read. This letter bears the unmistakable mark of criminal forgery. Relief and rage warred in Hazel's chest like opposing forces in a storm, each emotion fighting for dominance, while her young mind struggled to process the implications. Her father was innocent of murder. She had never truly doubted that truth in her heart, but he would die at sunrise unless she could prove the deception to authorities who might not want to hear evidence that contradicted their convenient narrative. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a heavy yoke that threatened to crush her spirit. But instead of collapsing beneath its burden, she found herself straightening with grim determination that surprised even her. Walter Whitcomb had raised no coward for a daughter. "We will help you completely," Hosa declared with the solemnity of a sacred vow that carried the weight of his lifetime's honor. "Your father honored his word about sharing the river's bounty with all who needed sustenance. We honor our word about friendship, justice, and the bonds that unite honest people against corruption." Working with urgent efficiency born of desperation and diminishing time, Hazel packed essential supplies into a sturdy canvas satchel, the forged letter. As evidence, a Bible page bearing her father's distinctive handwriting for comparison ammunition. For their rifle, strips of dried venison that would sustain them through hard travel, hardtack biscuits that could break teeth but would keep them alive, and her family's modest savings in silver coins that might buy crucial information or cooperation. She saddled Maggie, her reliable but strong-willed mule, who had carried her through countless prairie adventures, while Takoda prepared Ghost, his gray gelding bred for the endurance and harsh conditions that defined survival in Dakota Territory. "I must rally our people and gather intelligence about Vale's corruption through channels he cannot anticipate or control," Hosa announced, mounting his horse with the fluid grace of someone who had been riding since childhood. "My network of relatives and trading partners spans this territory like a spider's web that touches every settlement and trading post. If Vale has left traces of his criminal enterprise anywhere in this territory, we will find them. But you two must reach Crow's Landing before the execution hour strikes." The old chief's eyes grew distant for a moment, as if seeing beyond the present crisis to the larger pattern of injustice it represented. "Your father did more than sign a treaty, child. 3 winters ago, when sickness struck my grandson's family, Walter rode through a blizzard worse than this one to bring medicine from town. He asked no payment, sought no favor, simply helped because it was right. That kind of man doesn't commit murder." They set out across the frozen wilderness, 3 figures bent against nature's fury, while time itself became their enemy. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, rolling grasslands buried under snow that transformed familiar landmarks into alien terrain dotted with hardy sagebrush that rattled in the wind like bones, and marked by deep buffalo wallows from the vanished herds that once thundered across these plains like brown rivers of life. Cold bit through their heavy coats with icy fangs that found every gap in their defenses, turning their breath into white clouds that instantly dissipated in the bitter air. The wind carried sounds strangely, sometimes bringing voices from miles away, other times muffling sounds from mere yards distant. It was the kind of weather that could kill the unprepared in hours and the unlucky in minutes. At midday, they reached the skeletal remains of an abandoned homestead, its collapsed roof and broken windows, testament to dreams that had died hard on the unforgiving prairie. Snow had drifted through the gaps in the walls, creating strange sculptures that reminded Hazel of sleeping animals. As they rested their animals and consumed what meager food supplies they carried, a lean coyote emerged from the collapsed barn's shadows, drawn by the scent of their provisions and emboldened by winter hunger that had reduced it to desperate measures. The predator showed no fear of humans circling closer, with winter's ravenous need gleaming in its yellow eyes like tiny flames. Its ribs showed clearly through its thin coat, and its movements carried the desperate energy of a creature that had not eaten in days. Hazel grabbed a broken fence post from the debris scattered around the homestead and swung hard at the coyote's snout when it lunged for their pack with snapping jaws. The animal yelped in pain and bounded away across the prairie, disappearing into tall grass that rustled in the wind like whispered warnings. Takoda observed her quick reaction with obvious approval and something that might have been respect. You think quickly under pressure and act without hesitation. He noted with satisfaction while watching the coyotes retreat. Those instincts will serve you well in what lies ahead. The battles we face will require both courage and clever thinking. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the snow-covered landscape, painting everything in shades of blue and purple that spoke of approaching night, they approached a railroad spur, connecting the main territorial line to the Silver Spur Mines operations. The wooden tracks disappeared into the distance like parallel lines drawn on white paper, while telegraph wires hummed overhead with messages that might carry news of their mission. Two workers in heavy canvas coats spotted their approach from beside a maintenance shed, where tools and repair equipment lay scattered. They reached for rifles propped against the wooden structure with movements that spoke of recent instructions and nervous anticipation, clearly under strict orders to watch for suspicious travelers who might threaten whatever operation Vale was protecting. Without hesitation, Takoda guided them down the embankment toward a low wooden bridge spanning a frozen stream where ice had formed in fantastic shapes like natural sculptures. "Follow quietly and trust my lead," he whispered urgently, while his eyes constantly scanned for additional threats. "We must avoid confrontation while conserving ammunition for the greater battles that await us in town." Under the bridge's protective cover, they crouched in the shadow of wooden beams while cold seeped through their boots from the frozen ground beneath. Heavy boots thundered overhead as the workers searched methodically for intruders, their voices carrying clearly in the still air as they discussed the best places to look for troublemakers. Takoda aimed his rifle at the planks above their heads, but held fire with admirable discipline, understanding that every bullet would be precious in the conflicts to come. The metallic click of his rifle's action being readied seemed impossibly loud in the confined space, but the searchers above showed no sign of hearing it. After tense minutes that felt like hours of exposure, the footsteps finally retreated toward the maintenance shed, and they emerged cautiously into fading daylight that painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Every shot must count when the real fighting begins. Takoda explained as they remounted their animals, his voice carrying the hard-earned wisdom of someone who had survived multiple battles through careful resource management. "We cannot waste ammunition on warnings when deadly encounters await us in Crow's Landing." At the river crossing ferry operated by Winifred Carr, a sturdy widow whose husband had drowned in spring floods 3 years earlier, Hosa waited with horses steaming in the cold air, their breath creating white clouds that dissipated quickly in the bitter wind. His weathered face showed both grim determination and paternal concern as he prepared to deliver final words of counsel and encouragement that might be the last he would speak to them. "I return now to gather our people and seek evidence of Vale's corruption. Through channels and connections he cannot anticipate or control," the old chief said, placing his hands on Hazel's shoulders with warmth that penetrated her heavy coat and seemed to transfer some of his strength directly into her young body. "But you two must race time itself to reach Crow's Landing before dawn breaks over the execution ground. Prove this letter false, uncover the deeper conspiracy behind it, and justice will prevail over corruption." His voice carried absolute conviction, born of long experience with both human evil and the power of truth to overcome lies. "Your father would be proud beyond measure of the courage you display, child. The spirits of justice and truth guide your path forward through whatever darkness awaits." With that blessing ringing in her ears like a prayer, Hosa rode north toward Lakota Territory, leaving Hazel and Takoda to continue their desperate race against sunrise and the machinery of corrupt justice. In the distance, Crow's Landing's lights glowed against the gathering darkness like fallen stars that promised either salvation or doom for Walter Whitcomb, depending on their ability to expose the truth before official lies became official death. They reached the frontier town as purple dusk painted the sky in shades that reminded Hazel of the bruises on her father's face. Their horses breathing hard and their own bodies aching from the punishing ride across difficult terrain that had tested both animals and riders to their limits. Crow's Landing consisted of two intersecting dirt streets lined with practical wooden buildings that spoke of a community focused on survival rather than beauty. Henderson's General Store with its false front and painted signs, the Frontier Saloon with swinging doors that leaked light and raucous laughter into the street McKinnon's livery stable that reeked of horses and leather, the telegraph and newspaper office, where information flowed in and out of the territory. The territorial jail with its iron-barred windows that looked like dead eyes, and the imposing two-story structure housing the Silver Spur Mines administrative headquarters, where Gideon Vale conducted his business empire with the ruthless efficiency of a spider managing its web. Everything appeared deceptively normal, except for the unusual crowd gathered around the jail, where Sheriff Harlan Pike was posting an official notice with the ceremonial gravity reserved for important announcements. Townspeople stood in small groups, speaking in low voices that created a buzz of conversation like disturbed bees. Hazel's heart plummeted toward her boots as she read the painted wooden sign that might as well have been her father's tombstone. Public execution of Walter Whitcomb for the crime of murder. Dawn, February 23, 1879. By order of the Territorial Circuit Court. Sheriff Pike, a lean man with calculating gray eyes that missed nothing, and a carefully waxed mustache that spoke of personal vanity, unusual in frontier lawmen, supervised the posting while his deputy Rafe Coulter methodically cleaned a rifle nearby with the obvious familiarity of someone who used such weapons frequently. Neither man appeared troubled by the prospect of ending an innocent life, treating the scheduled execution as routine administrative business, requiring no emotional consideration or second thoughts. "We need documented proof this letter is completely forged," Takoda said quietly, studying the officials with warrior eyes that automatically cataloged their weapons positioning and potential vulnerabilities, while searching for weaknesses they might exploit. "The telegraph office might provide the answers we need," Hazel replied, noting the combination newspaper and communications building, where a lamp burned late into the evening hours, suggesting someone was working overtime on important business that might relate to their mission. Agnes Reed, a determined woman in her 30s, who operated both the telegraph key and a small printing press with the fierce independence of someone who had fought hard for her place in a man's world, examined the execution letter with the professional skepticism born of dealing daily in facts rather than frontier rumors and gossip. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the intelligence in her eyes, and ink stains marked the practical dress of a frontier journalist, dedicated to truth above social conventions. Wire-rimmed spectacles reflected lamplight as she studied every detail of the suspicious document with the thoroughness of someone who understood that lives depended on accuracy. This document contains multiple serious irregularities that would be obvious to anyone familiar with proper legal procedures, she announced with growing excitement and righteous anger that made her voice tremble slightly. "First, the territorial court calendar that I maintain for legal notices shows no murder trial scheduled for any Walter Whitcomb in the past month or longer. Second, Judge Fletcher's court sessions are meticulously recorded in my telegraph logs, and I can confirm he's been in Eagle Fork for 2 full weeks, hearing complex land disputes that have kept him completely occupied." She pointed to the red wax seal with triumphant satisfaction that lit up her entire face. "Most importantly, I've transmitted dozens of Judge Fletcher's official decisions over 3 years of operating this telegraph, and his official seals invariably use distinctive blue wax imported specially from Denver for authentication purposes. This red seal constitutes absolute proof of criminal forgery." Agnes paused, studying Hazel's face, with eyes that had learned to read people as carefully as documents. There are too many stories buried in this territory, and some of them need to be dug up and exposed to sunlight. Your father was trying to protect those miners, wasn't he? Hazel nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Then his sacrifice won't be meaningless. Agnes continued with quiet intensity. This newspaper won't let it be. She moved to her telegraph apparatus with practiced efficiency, born of years of experience. Her fingers dancing over the keys with remarkable speed. I'll wire Judge Fletcher immediately in Eagle Fork, requesting urgent confirmation of this document's authenticity. But I'll need the original envelope as court evidence when he responds to my inquiry. Outside the telegraph office, stepping from evening shadows like a predator that had been patiently stalking prey, Gideon Vale himself approached with the confident stride of a man accustomed to owning everything he surveyed. The mine superintendent cut an imposing figure that dominated the street simply by his presence. Broad-shouldered and expensively dressed in clothing that cost more than most families earned in a year. His silver hair perfectly groomed despite frontier settings that reduced most men to practical functionality. His pale blue eyes held the cold calculation of a man long accustomed to achieving his goals through systematic intimidation and carefully applied financial pressure that bent others to his will. Miss Whitcomb, he said with false paternal concern that didn't reach his calculating eyes, his voice carrying the educated Eastern inflections that spoke of money and power, far beyond local authority. You should return home immediately for your own safety and well-being. Your father's legal situation is most unfortunate, but territorial law must follow its prescribed course without interference from emotional family members. Return to your cabin now, and there will be peace for all concerned parties in this matter. The implied threat needed no elaboration for anyone with sufficient intelligence to understand power dynamics. But Vale's next words made his position unmistakably clear to even the most naive observer. Deputy Coulter takes his civic order responsibilities very seriously indeed, as do all the good men who work for me. Tragic accidents sometimes befall those who create unnecessary disturbances in otherwise peaceful communities. The prairie can be very dangerous for young women traveling alone. Hazel squared her shoulders and met his intimidating gaze with unflinching directness that clearly surprised him and caused his confident expression to flicker momentarily. You personally created that forged letter. She accused boldly, her young voice, carrying conviction that cut through his sophisticated threats like a sharp blade through silk. My father is completely innocent of any crime, and you know the absolute truth of his situation. Vale's mask of paternal concern slipped for just an instant, revealing the ruthless predator beneath his carefully maintained civilized appearance. In that brief moment, his true nature showed through like scales beneath human skin. Be extremely careful, young woman. This territory operates under principles and power structures you clearly don't understand. Certain interests possess influence extending far beyond local jurisdiction or territorial authority. Some battles cannot be won by children with good intentions. That evening, operating under cover of complete darkness that provided both concealment and danger, Hazel and Takoda approached the territorial jail from the rear alley, where garbage and unwanted things were discarded, a small barred window, providing their only access to the prisoners' cells within. The building loomed above them like a fortress of despair, its thick stone walls designed to keep hope inside and justice outside. Takoda boosted her carefully, his strong hands providing a secure foundation, while his wounded shoulders sent sharp jolts of pain through his left side that he bore without complaint. She could reach the iron bars and peer into the dim interior, lit only by a single flickering oil lamp that cast dancing shadows on the walls like imprisoned souls. Her father sat on a narrow wooden bunk that looked more like a medieval torture device than furniture, his clothing torn and stained with mud. and substances she preferred not to identify his familiar face, bearing fresh bruises and cuts that spoke eloquently of rough treatment and deliberate cruelty designed to break his spirit before his body died. When he recognized her whispered voice, calling his name through the bars, Walter Whitcomb's weathered features showed profound relief mixed with terror for her safety that nearly broke her heart. "Hazel, thank the Almighty you remain unharmed," he whispered urgently, his voice hoarse from cold and thirst, while his eyes devoured the sight of her face as if storing it against eternity. "But you can't be here. The danger to your life is far too great. If they find you—" Papa, I need you to tell me the complete truth directly," she demanded with quiet intensity that brooked no evasion or protective lies. "Did you kill Jonah Derry?" "Absolutely not," Walter replied with unshakable conviction that rang with moral authority earned through decades of honest living. "I have never taken human life or raised my hand in violence against any man, woman, or child. More importantly, Jonah Derry is not dead at all. Vale is concealing him somewhere for reasons directly connected to this elaborate deception. The entire conspiracy serves Vale's ultimate goal. My death will void the water-sharing treaty with Hosa's people, giving him exclusive control of Ash River access for his mining operations." Walter's voice dropped to barely audible levels to avoid detection by guards who might be listening from nearby cells or corridors. "There's additional motivation you must understand clearly. I've been filing detailed safety reports about dangerously rotting timber supports throughout the mine's lower levels for months. Those deteriorating beams could cause massive cave-ins that would kill dozens of innocent workers in completely preventable tragedies. My documented evidence could bring federal mine inspectors who would shut down operations permanently rather than allow such dangerous conditions to continue. Vale needs me eliminated before anyone investigates these life-threatening safety violations." As her father provided this crucial intelligence that explained the conspiracy's true scope, Hazel lost her precarious grip on the window bars and scraped her palm against the rough stone wall with a sound that seemed to echo through the alley, like a gunshot. Blood welled from the abrasion, warm against her cold skin. Instantly, Takoda pulled her down behind a large wooden watering trough as Deputy Coulter emerged from the jail's rear entrance, with a blazing lantern sweeping its light methodically across the precise area where they had been standing moments earlier. They remained absolutely motionless in the cold mud that soaked through their clothing, controlling their breathing while their hearts hammered against their ribs with sound that seemed loud enough to wake the dead. The lantern light passed over their hiding place twice before Coulter finally returned inside after what felt like an eternity of exposure to discovery and capture. The close encounter demonstrated with frightening clarity how easily their mission could end in capture imprisonment or immediate execution without trial. Every step they took brought new risks that could destroy not only their plans but their lives. At the telegraph office, Agnes received the response she had been anxiously awaiting from Judge Fletcher's court in Eagle Fork. Judge Fletcher confirms he's 3 full days away in Eagle Fork and issued absolutely no execution order for any Walter Whitcomb or anyone else. She announced with righteous indignation, blazing in her intelligent eyes like fire that would not be extinguished. He's departing immediately for Crow's Landing with federal marshals, but cannot possibly arrive until the day after tomorrow at earliest, given the weather conditions and distance involved. Agnes's commitment to exposing systematic corruption intensified. With each revelation, her journalistic instincts aroused by the scent of a story that could change everything. "I'll print this explosive story in my newspaper, but we need substantially more evidence than just the forged letter itself. We must document Vale's complete methodology and crystal-clear motivation for this elaborate conspiracy." At McKinnon's livery stable, where the warm scent of horses and leather provided a welcome contrast to the cold night air, they encountered Jasper Flynn, a 16-year-old boy with honest blue eyes and work-calloused hands that spoke eloquently of hard frontier labor and honest effort in a world that rarely rewarded either. as he expertly fitted Maggie with new iron shoes, hammering each nail with practiced precision born of necessity and skill. Jasper's personal stake in their mission became clear through natural conversation that revealed the depths of Vale's control over ordinary families. My older brother Edwin works the deep shifts at the Silver Spur, down where the air barely moves, and cave-ins are a constant threat. Jasper explained while positioning another horseshoe nail with careful accuracy that spoke of training begun in childhood. He owes Vale substantial money for medical expenses when he broke his leg badly in a mine accident last year. The company doctor charged enough to buy a horse, and Vale keeps adding compound interest and supply fees until Edwin can never satisfy the debt completely, no matter how hard he works or how many extra shifts he takes. Jasper paused in his work, his young face showing anger beyond his years. Yesterday, I saw Edwin stumble twice while walking home. He's working himself to death to pay a debt that keeps growing faster than he can pay it. If your corruption accusations prove true, exposing Vale might free Edwin and other decent workers trapped in this system of financial bondage that's worse than slavery, because at least slaves were fed properly. Their planning session was violently interrupted when two of Vale's hired enforcers burst through the stable doors with weapons already drawn, their faces showing the cold professionalism of men who killed for money rather than passion. The first man, built like a bull, and twice as mean, swung a heavy wooden club at Takoda's head with obvious intent to kill or seriously maim. But the warrior's old shoulder injury sustained in a brutal cavalry skirmish the previous autumn, when he'd taken a saber cut defending his band's horses, sent a sharp bolt of agony through his left arm at the crucial moment. His reflexes faltered just enough for the club to strike a glancing blow that staggered him backward against the stable wall with bone-jarring force. Stars exploded across his vision, and warm blood began flowing from a cut on his scalp. Hazel reacted with desperate instinct born of mortal danger, and her father's teachings about fighting when cornered, grabbing a sharp horse pick from McKinnon's workbench and driving its pointed steel end deep into the attacker's thigh muscle with all the strength her young body possessed. The man screamed in agony and collapsed to his knees, clutching his bleeding leg while cursing her with violent obscenities that would have made a saloon keeper blush. Meanwhile, Jasper proved his worth as an ally by swinging his heavy shovel like a war club, catching the second enforcer squarely across the ribs with bone-crushing force that doubled him over in excruciating pain and left him gasping for breath that wouldn't come. Both attackers fled into the night, limping and cursing their failure. But their violent message had been delivered with perfect clarity. The stakes were escalating rapidly toward lethal confrontation, and Vale would not hesitate to use deadly force against anyone who threatened his carefully constructed conspiracy. "I'm completely committed to helping you in every way possible," Jasper declared, his young voice steady despite the shocking violence they had all witnessed firsthand. The encounter had transformed him from helpful boy to determined ally in the space of heartbeats. "If you can prove your father's innocence and expose Vale's systematic corruption, it might save my brother and many other decent men trapped by his criminal schemes." Jasper also provided valuable tactical intelligence that could prove crucial in the battles ahead. Most mine guards are honest workers just trying to feed their families, but some owe Vale money through gambling debts or family medical emergencies they couldn't afford. There's one named Silas Morrison who's terrified of crossing Vale because of substantial poker losses that keep mounting higher each week. He might be forced to assist Vale's operations if pressured sufficiently, even against his natural inclinations toward decency and fairness. The following day brought their first major challenge as they sought evidence, while evading Vale's increasingly aggressive and violent attempts to stop their investigation permanently. The morning sky had taken on an ominous yellow-brown color that veteran frontiersmen recognized with the dread of those who understood nature's more dangerous moods. A massive dust storm was approaching from the western Badlands like a wall of choking death, as the enormous cloud of churning earth and debris rolled toward Crow's Landing like a living mountain that devoured everything in its path. Hazel, Takoda, and Jasper found themselves caught in the open prairie while pursuing a lead about suspicious activity at an abandoned mining claim that might contain evidence of Vale's corruption. The storm hit with the devastating force of a runaway locomotive, instantly reducing visibility to mere inches and filling the air with stinging grit that made breathing nearly impossible and turned each inhalation into an act of courage. In the chaos of howling wind and blinding dust that transformed the familiar landscape into an alien hellscape, they became separated from their horses and each other, despite staying close together initially. Hazel stumbled through the maelstrom like a lost soul, a bandana pressed over her nose and mouth, providing minimal protection against the choking particles, unable to see her own hands stretched desperately in front of her face. The roar was deafening, drowning out all other sound and making communication impossible even at shouting distance. Terror gripped her as she realized she was completely alone, in conditions that could kill her within hours. For a moment, the weight of responsibility and fear threatened to crush her spirit entirely. She sank to her knees. In the swirling dust, her father's Bible page pressed against her chest beneath her coat. The familiar texture of the paper and the memory of Walter's voice reading those same words gave her strength to stand again. Through sheer luck that felt like divine intervention, she collided with Takoda, who had been moving in increasingly desperate circles, trying to maintain his bearings while fighting against wind that threatened to knock him down with each step. Together, they called out for Jasper until their voices were raw and their throats felt lined with sandpaper, finally locating him huddled behind a large boulder that provided minimal shelter from the storm's fury. But they were not alone in the swirling chaos. Through the blinding dust, they caught glimpses of mounted figures. Vale's men had followed them and were using the storm as cover to close in for the kill. The dust provided concealment for both hunter and prey, turning the pursuit into a deadly game of blind man's bluff, where the first mistake would be the last. Takoda's wounded shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat as he raised his rifle with gritted teeth, knowing he would have only one shot before their position was revealed by muzzle flash. When a shadowy figure loomed out of the dust, barely 10 feet away with a rifle raised to fire, he squeezed the trigger with deadly accuracy born of years hunting both animals and men. The man toppled from his horse with a scream that was instantly swallowed by the howling wind, his body disappearing into the swirling brown chaos as if the storm itself had claimed him. Using the temporary confusion created by their attacker's death, they fought their way toward a rocky outcropping they had spotted briefly before the storm hit. The journey of perhaps 50 yards took nearly an hour of struggling against wind that seemed determined to blow them back to yesterday, each step requiring tremendous effort and determination that drained their strength like water from a broken barrel. By the time they reached the shelter of the rock formation, their clothes were shredded by flying debris. Their skin was raw from sand that struck like tiny bullets, and their precious water supplies were contaminated with grit that made drinking an exercise in misery. They huddled together in a shallow cave formed by fallen boulders until the storm passed, sharing body heat and what little food they had while listening to the fury outside gradually diminish. They emerged hours later to find a landscape transformed beyond recognition. Familiar landmarks had been erased or buried under drifts of fine dust that rose and fell like frozen ocean waves, making navigation nearly impossible. Their horses were gone, scattered by the storm's violence, and they faced a long, dangerous walk back to town through terrain that looked like the surface of an alien world. But the ordeal had provided an unexpected advantage despite its cost in time and comfort. In the aftermath of the storm, they discovered the body of the man Takoda had shot, and in his saddlebags they found treasure more valuable than gold. A leather folder containing correspondence between Vale and corrupt territorial officials, detailing bribes and agreements to overlook safety violations at the mine in exchange for regular payments and political favors. During their long walk back to Crow's Landing, Takoda shared a memory that explained his deep loyalty to Walter Whitcomb. 2 winters ago, my sister's youngest child fell through ice on the river, he said quietly as they trudged through the transformed landscape. By the time we pulled him out, he was blue and still. Your father was in town that day and came running when he heard the commotion. He knew things about saving drowning victims that we didn't white man's medicine, he called it. He worked over that boy for an hour, breathing life back into him when we had given up hope. Takoda's voice grew thick with emotion, rarely displayed by Lakota warriors. When my nephew opened his eyes and cried, your father just smiled and walked away. He never spoke of it again, never asked for payment or favors. That's the measure of Walter Whitcomb. He saves lives because it's right, not because it benefits him. Their next breakthrough came through a carefully planned infiltration of the abandoned eastern section of the Silver Spur mine, where HOSA's intelligence network suggested Jonah Derry might be hidden. The old mine workings were a maze of unstable tunnels carved from living rock, some flooded with stagnant water that reflected their lantern light like black mirrors, others filled with poisonous gases from decaying organic matter that could kill a man in minutes. The entrance they chose was partially collapsed, requiring them to squeeze through gaps barely wider than their shoulders, while loose rock showered down from above with each movement. The air inside was thick and stale, carrying the metallic taste of deep earth and the musty smell of places where sunlight had never penetrated. Jasper, being the smallest and most agile, volunteered to explore the deepest sections, while Hazel and Takoda kept watch at the entrance. His courage impressed them both, and the boy was proving himself to be made of the same stern material as his older brother, willing to risk everything to save family and friends. Inside the maze of tunnels, Jasper discovered more than just evidence of recent habitation. In addition to food scraps and blankets that proved someone had been living in the abandoned workings, he found a mine safety report in Walter Whitcomb's distinctive handwriting that detailed dangerous conditions Vale had ignored for months. The document was dated just days before Walter's arrest, providing a clear timeline for Vale's motivation to eliminate the troublesome safety inspector. But the tunnels held dangers beyond corrupt evidence. They held carefully constructed traps designed to eliminate intruders permanently. As Jasper gathered the crucial documents, his foot caught a nearly invisible wire stretched across the tunnel floor. The trap triggered a cascade of loose rock from above a shower of stone and debris that barely missed his head and would have crushed him instantly. The thunderous crash echoed through the underground network like cannon fire, alerting guards who had been stationed nearby, in case anyone was foolish enough to investigate the abandoned workings. Within minutes, they could hear voices and see lantern light approaching through the tunnel system. The 3 companions found themselves trapped in a deadly game of cat and mouse through the underground labyrinth, with armed guards blocking the main entrance and closing in from multiple directions. With pursuit growing closer by the minute, they were forced to navigate through flooded shafts where ice-cold water reached their chests and threatened to sweep them away, and unstable passages where the ceiling might collapse at any moment. Takoda's knowledge of underground water flows, learned during his youth, when his band sheltered in cave systems during harsh winters, became their salvation. He guided them through a terrifying crawl through a tunnel barely wider than their shoulders, with ice-cold water rising around them and the constant threat of cave-in from above pressing down like the weight of the entire earth. Hazel's courage nearly failed as claustrophobia gripped her in the narrow space, her heart pounding so hard she feared it might burst. The walls seemed to close in with each breath, and panic threatened to overwhelm her rational mind entirely. But Takoda's calm voice guided her through the worst moments, his quiet confidence providing an anchor of stability in the midst of terror. "Breathe slowly and think of open sky," he whispered from just ahead of her in the crushing darkness. "Your father faces worse than this right now. We are his hope, and hope does not surrender to fear." They emerged from a hidden opening nearly a mile from the mine, muddy and exhausted but alive, carrying evidence that could help prove Walter's innocence. However, their trials were far from over, and the most dangerous part of their mission still lay ahead. That evening, as they prepared to present their findings to Agnes for publication in her newspaper, they made their most shocking discovery yet. Following fresh tracks from the abandoned mine workings, they located Jonah Derry himself very much alive, but severely wounded and trapped under fallen timber in a deliberately engineered cave-in designed to kill him slowly and painfully. The foreman was barely conscious when they found him, his face pale from blood loss and his breathing shallow. Working carefully with crowbars and rope, they managed to free him from the crushing weight of the timber supports and transport him to Doc Felder, a gray-bearded physician who had been quietly recruited to their cause through Agnes's persuasion and his own disgust with Vale's treatment of injured miners. As the doctor worked to stabilize his patient with professional skill that spoke of years treating frontier violence and industrial accidents, Derry revealed the conspiracy's complete scope in a voice weakened by pain and substantial blood loss, but strengthened by righteous anger that burned in his fevered eyes. Vale demanded I approve the use of rotting inferior timber supports throughout the mine's lower levels to reduce lumber costs by 60% and maximize his profit margins. Derry explained between painful breaths. I refused absolutely, because those supports would inevitably collapse and kill dozens of innocent workers in completely preventable cave-ins. I've seen what happens when greed trumps safety. Men die screaming in the dark, while their families wait at home for suppers that never come. Derry's eyes blazed with fury despite his obvious physical weakness. When I wouldn't cooperate with his murderous cost-cutting measures, Vale ordered Pike to shoot some anonymous drifter passing through town, bury the poor soul in a coffin labeled with my name, and spread word throughout the territory that I had been brutally murdered by Walter Whitcomb. Then they framed your father for my supposed death, because he's been filing detailed safety reports that could bring federal mine inspectors and shut down the entire operation permanently. The wounded foreman struggled against his injuries to reach inside his torn, blood-stained shirt and produce a crumpled document that made their hearts race with sudden hope. I kept this mine pay voucher as insurance against potential betrayal. It's signed in my own distinctive handwriting and dated 3 full days after my supposed murder occurred. This paper provides conclusive, irrefutable proof that I was alive and actively working after the alleged crime took place. But Derry's most chilling revelation came last, delivered with desperate urgency, despite his weakening condition. Vale is planning to detonate powerful explosive charges at the river dam tomorrow morning, precisely at sunrise. The resulting flood will sweep through every mine tunnel and wash away all evidence of the unsafe timber supports the conspiracy to frame Walter and my own inconvenient survival. Every trace of his extensive criminal enterprise will disappear forever under tons of rushing water and collapsed rock. However, as they carefully prepared to move Derry to a safer location where he could recover from his injuries, an unexpected ally emerged from the shadows with information that changed their understanding of the entire conspiracy. Silas Morrison, the indebted mine worker Jasper had mentioned earlier, appeared silently in the doorway. But instead of working for Vale, as they had feared, he revealed himself as someone with his own complex agenda and dangerous double life. I've been feeding information to both sides for months, walking a tightrope that could get me killed any day. Silas confessed quietly, his weathered face showing the immense strain of maintaining his perilous deception. Vale believes I'm his loyal informant because of my substantial gambling debts that keep growing larger each week. But I've been secretly gathering evidence of his crimes while pretending absolute loyalty to his cause. My own younger brother died in a completely preventable cave-in last year because of those rotten inferior timbers Vale insists on using to save money that goes into his own pockets. Silas had been deliberately feeding Vale false information about their movements and activities, while systematically collecting documentary proof of the conspiracy. I have detailed written records of every bribe, every threat, Every illegal order Vale has given over the past 18 months. Names, dates, amounts, everything a federal prosecutor would need to build an airtight case. But I couldn't act alone against such powerful enemies. I needed honest, courageous people to help expose the truth without getting killed in the process. This revelation added crucial new depth to their mission, while explaining how they had survived several close calls that logically should have resulted in capture, torture, or death. Silas had been subtly misdirecting Vale's men and providing false intelligence while positioning himself as the perfect double agent with access to inside information that could make the difference between success and failure. They concealed the seriously injured foreman in Winifred Carr's secure equipment storage shed, where Doc Felder could continue providing essential medical treatment safely away from Vale's extensive surveillance network. The widow's property was isolated enough to avoid casual observation while being defensible if attacked. Agnes immediately began composing urgent telegrams to Judge Fletcher and federal authorities, providing detailed copies of their accumulated evidence and requesting immediate intervention before the scheduled execution could be carried out. However, Vale's spy network had been tracking their movements more effectively than they realized, and his response was swift and brutal. The following evening, Agnes discovered that her newspaper office had been systematically ransacked by professional thieves who knew exactly what they were looking for. And the crucial ledger containing detailed financial evidence of the corruption had been stolen without leaving any trace of the perpetrator's identity. More ominously, a new execution notice appeared prominently posted at the territorial jail, written in official language that made their blood run cold. Due to the prisoner's rapidly deteriorating physical condition and increasing concerns about potential public safety disturbances, the execution of Walter Whitcomb has been moved to 4:00 a.m. on February 23rd. The loss of their most important documented evidence struck the group like a devastating physical blow that left them reeling. Without the ledger's detailed record of systematic bribery and financial corruption, they would have to rely entirely on Derry's live testimony and his hidden pay voucher as proof of Vale's crimes. The obvious danger was that living witnesses could be permanently eliminated through violence, while written evidence was significantly more difficult to destroy completely. We still possessed Derry himself and his signed voucher as irrefutable proof. Takoda reminded Hazel as despair threatened to overwhelm her young spirit completely. Sometimes, truth requires only one strong, honest voice speaking clearly to be heard above a chorus of lies and deception. But Hazel was struggling with more than just tactical setbacks. That night, as she sat alone with her father's Bible page, doubt crept into her heart like poison. She was just a 16-year-old girl fighting against powerful men with money influence and no scruples about murder. What if she failed? What if her father died because she wasn't smart enough, strong enough, brave enough? She traced the familiar words with her finger, remembering Walter's voice reading these same passages by lamplight while wind howled around their cabin. The righteous may fall 7 times, but they will rise again. His voice seemed to echo in her memory, reminding her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite being afraid. At the stroke of midnight, with cold February rain beginning to fall and gradually turning the remaining snow into treacherous, slippery sleet that made every step dangerous, they received an ominous message delivered by a frightened boy who disappeared into the darkness immediately after completing his task. The hastily scrawled note was brief but terrifying in its implications. The Flynn boy for your evidence. Come to the old mill pond alone immediately, or he dies slowly and painfully. At the desolate mill pond located south of town, surrounded by skeletal trees that creaked ominously in the wind like the bones of dead giants, they found Gideon Vale and Deputy Rafe Coulter standing on a rotting wooden dock with Jasper Flynn positioned between them as a human shield. The boy's hands were bound tightly behind his back with coarse rope that cut into his wrists, and his face showed clear evidence of rough treatment that spoke of deliberate cruelty designed to send a message. Vale's expensive suit was now completely ruined by mud and physical struggle, showing the strain of maintaining his elaborate conspiracy against mounting opposition from unexpected sources. His carefully groomed appearance had been transformed into that of a desperate criminal fighting for his very survival, though his eyes still held the cold calculation of a predator that had not yet been cornered completely. A simple, straightforward transaction that benefits everyone involved. Vale called across the dark water, his voice carrying easily in the still night air, despite the wind that rattled bare branches overhead. Derry's signed pay voucher in exchange for the boy's continued existence and good health. Hazel approached the unstable dock with deliberate caution, her boots slipping slightly on the wet wooden planks as she clutched their most precious piece of evidence, the signed voucher that could potentially prove her father's complete innocence in any honest court of law. The document felt incredibly fragile in her hands, like a butterfly's wing that might crumble at the slightest mishandling. She made the exchange exactly as agreed, her hands trembling with cold and fear as she handed over the document that represented their best hope for saving Walter's life. But the moment Jasper started toward shore, moving carefully across the treacherous wooden planks that groaned under his weight, Vale drew his nickel-plated pistol with practiced speed and methodically shot through the dock's wooden support posts. The entire structure collapsed with a tremendous splash that echoed across the water like thunder, dropping Jasper into the pond's muddy shallows, where he immediately began sinking into soft bottom sediment that threatened to claim his life within minutes. The boy's courage showed as he managed to grab a partially submerged log with his bound hands and keep his head above the surface, while struggling desperately against the sucking mud that pulled at his legs like grasping fingers. Takoda provided covering fire with precise shots that forced Vale and Coulter to take cover behind nearby trees, his rifle barking sharply in the cold air, while muzzle flashes lit up his grim face. The shots were carefully aimed to suppress rather than kill, conserving precious ammunition while creating the chaos needed for rescue operations. Winifred Carr, proving her worth as an ally, circled the pond with her horse and threw a lasso with the skill of someone raised on cattle ranches. Her rope found its mark, and through coordinated teamwork, they pulled the endangered boy to solid ground before the cold water could complete what Vale's cruelty had started. The exchange had cost them the voucher, their most concrete proof of the conspiracy's existence and their father's innocence. With dawn approaching rapidly and the execution moved to an even earlier hour, crushing desperation gripped them all like a physical weight that threatened to break their spirits completely. As the cold rain continued to swell the Ash River toward dangerous flood levels that threatened surrounding farmland and the town itself, Vale prepared to implement his master plan's final, most destructive phase. At the massive earthen dam constructed upstream from Crow's Landing, his remaining hired men positioned powerful explosive charges designed to blast a catastrophic breach that would send a devastating wall of water through every tunnel of the Silver Spur mine. The resulting flood would destroy all evidence of unsafe working conditions, the elaborate conspiracy to frame Walter Whitcomb and Jonah Derry's inconvenient survival, washing away every trace of Vale's extensive criminal enterprise under tons of rushing water and collapsed rock that would bury the truth forever. The group formulated a coordinated three-phase plan to save Walter's life and prevent the destruction of crucial evidence before Judge Fletcher could arrive with federal authority to restore proper justice to Crow's Landing. Time had become their greatest enemy. They possessed less than 4 hours before both the execution and the catastrophic dam explosion would occur simultaneously, eliminating both Walter and the evidence that could exonerate him. Phase 1 required breaking Walter from the territorial jail before the accelerated 4:00 a.m. execution could be carried out by Pike and his deputies. This operation demanded military precision and split-second timing to succeed without bloodshed that would mark them as criminals, regardless of their motives. The sequence unfolded with clockwork precision, despite mounting tension that made every second feel like an eternity of exposure to discovery and failure. Winifred drove her heavily loaded supply wagon through Crow's Landing's muddy main street, and staged an elaborate breakdown directly in front of the jail, deliberately scattering goods across the road to create maximum confusion and obstruction that would occupy official attention. Agnes stumbled and fell dramatically in the thick, clinging mud nearby, crying out for assistance with convincing distress that drew both Sheriff Pike and Deputy Coulter outside to investigate the disturbance and maintain civic order. Her performance was sufficiently believable to hold their complete attention for the crucial minutes required, though her heart was pounding so hard she feared it might give away the deception. During the carefully orchestrated confusion, Takoda slipped silently behind Pike with the stealth and precision learned through years of warfare and hunting dangerous game, both animal and human. The metallic jingle of keys being lifted from the sheriff's belt seemed impossibly loud in the night air. But Pike remained too focused on the street commotion to notice the theft until it was far too late to prevent the escape. But as Hazel and Jasper ran directly to Walter's cell with their boots echoing on the stone floor, an unexpected complication arose that nearly destroyed their carefully planned operation. Old Henrik the baker, making his early morning rounds to prepare bread for the day's customers, happened to pass by the jail and caught sight of Hazel through the window. His eyes widened in shock and recognition as he realized what was happening before his very eyes. "You're breaking out the murderer!" Henrik shouted with the indignation of a law-abiding citizen reaching for the alarm bell that would wake the entire town and bring armed men running from every direction. Quick thinking and desperate honesty saved them from immediate disaster. Jasper tackled the elderly baker as gently as possible, while Hazel pressed a silver coin into the man's palm. Precious money from their dwindling funds, but worth it if it bought his silence. "My father is innocent," she whispered urgently, her young voice carrying conviction that cut through his shock and confusion. "We have proof, but if you ring that bell, an innocent man dies at sunrise. Please just give us 10 minutes to save a good man's life." Something in her desperate sincerity and the genuine tears streaming down her face convinced Henrik to nod reluctantly. The baker's own father had been wrongly accused of stealing grain during a bad harvest year, and he understood the terrible power of false accusations to destroy innocent lives. The iron key turned with a rusty scrape that seemed to reverberate through the entire jail like a gunshot. But no other guards appeared to investigate the sound that might have doomed them all. Walter was noticeably weakened by days of inadequate food and exposure to the bitter February cold that penetrated even the jail's thick stone walls. But he could walk steadily with minimal assistance from his daughter and their courageous young ally. His eyes showed profound relief mixed with paternal concern for the dangers they were facing on his behalf. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered as they helped him to his feet. "The risk to you is too great. The risk to you is greater." Hazel replied simply, and Walter's heart swelled with pride at the woman his little girl was becoming. When Deputy Coulter finally realized what was happening and reached for his holstered sidearm with obvious intent to shoot first and ask questions later, Takoda expertly tripped him face first into the thick clinging mud, while Walter, despite his obvious physical weakness, delivered a solid headbutt that rendered the deputy unconscious instantly. They rapidly bound both lawmen with strong rope taken from Winifred's wagon and posted a hastily written sign reading, "Execution stayed by federal order," to confuse any townspeople who might otherwise interfere with their escape plans. The deception would buy them precious time before the truth was discovered and pursuit organized. The group fled through Crow's Landing's back streets in Winifred's wagon as the first pale light of dawn began appearing on the eastern horizon like a death sentence counting down toward zero. Every passing second brought them closer to both the execution hour and the dam explosion that would destroy all evidence forever, leaving Vale free to continue his reign of corruption and terror. Behind them, they could hear confused shouts from the jail as other townspeople began to discover the escape and raise alarms that would soon bring organized pursuit, with guns, horses, and grim determination to recapture the escaped prisoner. Phase 2 represented the most dangerous and physically demanding part of their entire plan. at the dam construction site, where massive earthworks held back thousands of tons of water pressure that could devastate everything downstream. They faced a sophisticated timing mechanism that Vale had installed to trigger the explosives automatically at sunrise, with mechanical precision that would not fail. Unlike simple fuses that could be cut with a knife, this device consisted of a complex clockwork mechanism connected to multiple charges positioned at strategic points along the dam structure. The entire system was housed in a steel box that resisted their initial attempts to open it, while through a small window they could see intricate gears turning with relentless precision as dawn approached. According to Walter's gold pocket watch, they had exactly 31 minutes before detonation would destroy evidence and potentially kill anyone still in the area. The mechanical ticking seemed to grow louder with each passing second, like the heartbeat of approaching doom. Hazel studied the mechanism with growing alarm that threatened to paralyze her with its complexity. The device was clearly beyond her ability to dismantle safely. One wrong move could trigger immediate explosion that would kill them all instantly. "We need a different approach," she said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "We need wisdom, not force." Takoda agreed grimly, his wounded shoulder sending sharp bolts of pain through his left side as he raised his rifle to cover Hazel's position while scanning the surrounding area for guards who might interfere with whatever solution they could devise. Their salvation came from an unexpected source that proved the value of Hosa's extensive network of allies and information gatherers. The old chief arrived with a small band of Lakota warriors who had ridden hard through the night after receiving Silas Morrison's urgent message about the dam plot that threatened not only the mine, but potentially the entire downstream area, including native settlements. Hosa brought with him knowledge gained from years of frontier warfare and a lifetime of observing how natural forces could be redirected rather than stopped entirely. The white man builds strong machines, but forgets the simple truths that govern all things. He observed calmly while studying the clockwork mechanism that continued its relentless countdown toward destruction. Water follows the path of least resistance, always seeking the lowest ground. Instead of trying to stop the explosion that might prove impossible with their limited time and resources, they would redirect its destructive force away from the areas they needed to protect. Working frantically with shovels and pickaxes borrowed from nearby construction equipment, the combined group began digging a diversion channel that would guide the initial flood away from the mine tunnels and toward an empty valley where it could dissipate harmlessly. The work was backbreaking, complicated by incoming rifle fire from Vale's remaining guards, who had taken defensive positions on high ground overlooking the dam site. Takoda and the Lakota warriors provided covering fire with their Spencer rifles, while Hazel, Jasper, Walter, and the others dug desperately in the pre-dawn darkness that provided some concealment from enemy marksmen. With 7 minutes remaining on the clockwork timer, according to Walter's watch, they completed the diversion channel that would hopefully save both evidence and lives. The mechanism could not be stopped or disabled, but its destructive power would be largely neutralized by their engineering solution that worked with natural forces rather than against them. They took cover behind large granite boulders as the final seconds ticked away on the mechanical timer, and the explosion split the morning air with tremendous force that shook the ground beneath their feet and sent debris flying in all directions like deadly hail. Water roared through the breach in the dam with the sound of an angry god. But instead of devastating the mine and destroying crucial evidence, it followed their carefully planned diversion route into the valley, where it spread out and lost much of its destructive power. The flood still provided dramatic proof of Vale's willingness to destroy everything to cover his crimes, but the crucial evidence remained intact, while lives were preserved through clever thinking and hard work. Phase 3 unfolded at the mine's hoist house, where the massive steam-powered machinery that lifted workers and ore from the underground tunnels was housed in a sturdy wooden building that dominated the mine complex. The structure reeked of coal smoke and industrial grease. its interior filled with enormous gears, pulleys, drive belts, and the great steam boiler that powered the entire operation with mechanical precision that never rested. They had barely reached this strategic position when Sheriff Pike appeared, having somehow freed himself from the jail bonds through methods they had not anticipated. His appearance was disheveled and wild, his carefully maintained authority figure facade cracked by desperation and approaching failure. But he was not alone. He held Agnes Reed at gunpoint, pressing the cold steel barrel of his pistol against her temple, while his eyes blazed with fury that had festered for decades. "You think you're so clever playing at being heroes?" Pike snarled at Hazel, his voice cracking with strain, while his carefully waxed mustache twitched with nervous energy. "But you never understood the real reason I didn't order my men to kill you that first night at your cabin. Always wondered what mercy looked like in this godforsaken territory." As Pike spoke with the bitter satisfaction of a man finally revealing long-held secrets, an older townsman who had been hiding nearby whispered urgently to Jasper. "Pike's got old history with her father, boy. Something ugly from his army days. Always got a sour look whenever Walter's name came up in conversation, like he was tasting something rotten." The pieces of the conspiracy's personal dimension fell into place as Pike continued his rant, his voice rising with each word, until it echoed off the industrial machinery surrounding them. "Your precious sanctimonious father cost me everything 20 years ago during the Indian Wars. He testified against me in a military court-martial for selling army supplies to hostile tribes, supplies they used to kill American soldiers. I was stripped of my sergeant's rank, dishonorably discharged from the only life I'd ever known, and left with nothing but burning hatred for the man who destroyed my career with his precious, inflexible honesty." This revelation added the crucial element of personal vendetta to the conspiracy's financial motivations, explaining the depth of Pike's commitment to Vale's scheme. His cooperation wasn't just about money or corruption. It was about revenge against Walter Whitcomb for past humiliation that had poisoned his soul for 2 decades and turned him into the kind of man who could participate in elaborate murder plots. Walter stepped forward courageously, despite his obvious physical weakness from days of harsh imprisonment, his voice carrying the moral authority of a man who had lived his entire life according to principles that never bent to convenience or personal gain. "The conspiracy's motive is completely clear now," he declared, addressing Pike directly with the kind of dignity that had made him enemies among lesser men. "Personal revenge combined with financial gain. Murder me through legal fraud, void the waters-sharing treaty with Hosa's people, steal exclusive river access for Vale's mining operations, and cover up safety violations that could bring federal intervention and permanent closure of the unsafe mine." Vale appeared in the hoist house doorway. Like an avenging demon, his expensive clothing now completely destroyed by mud and physical struggle. His carefully maintained facade of respectability transformed into the appearance of a desperate criminal, fighting for survival with nothing left to lose. His pale eyes blazed with madness as he realized his elaborate conspiracy was crumbling around him despite all his careful planning and substantial financial investment in corruption. Without warning, negotiation, or mercy for anyone present, he raised his nickel-plated pistol with steady hands and fired directly at Walter's chest, intending to end the threat permanently through simple, brutal murder that would eliminate the most dangerous witness to his crimes. Takoda threw himself sideways with reflexes honed by years of combat, pushing Hazel from the bullet's deadly path while deliberately taking the shot across his already wounded shoulder. The impact tore open his old cavalry injury and sent fresh blood streaming down his arm in a scarlet cascade that soaked through his shirt, but he maintained his footing through sheer determination and warrior's pride that refused to yield to pain or weakness. In a moment of desperate inspiration, born of paternal fury and righteous anger, Walter seized a heavy work axe from the tool rack, mounted on the hoist house wall, and swung it with every ounce of remaining strength in his weakened body. Not at the steel cables as might be expected, but at the massive steam boiler's complex system of pressure gauges, release valves, and control mechanisms that regulated the dangerous forces contained within. The crushing blow shattered the delicate brass fittings that controlled the boiler's steam pressure, with mechanical precision, instantly creating a catastrophic failure of the safety systems that had been designed to prevent exactly this kind of industrial disaster. Superheated steam began venting uncontrollably through the damaged valves, creating a deafening shriek that filled the building with scalding vapor, thick enough to blind everyone present. The industrial catastrophe that followed was swift, terrible, and utterly beyond human control once it began. Without proper pressure regulation, the great steam engine began racing out of control like a mechanical monster, freed from its chains. Massive iron gears spun faster and faster, their mounting bolts shearing under tremendous stress that exceeded all design specifications. The enormous flywheel, designed to rotate at steady speed for optimal efficiency, became a spinning death trap as it wobbled violently on bearings damaged by the excessive rotational forces. Metal screamed against metal in harmonics that hurt the ears, while drive belts snapped with sounds like rifle shots and gear teeth broke under loads they were never meant to bear. Steam pressure that should have been carefully controlled instead built to dangerous levels that turned the entire mechanism into a bomb waiting to explode. Gideon Vale, caught in the center of the mechanical chaos he had created through his greed and willingness to sacrifice safety for profit, was struck by a flying piece of shattered gear housing that had been launched by centrifugal force with the velocity of a cannonball. The impact hurled his broken body against the great flywheel just as it broke free from its damaged mountings, crushing him beneath tons of spinning steel and iron that had been transformed from industrial equipment into instruments of destruction. The mine superintendent died instantly destroyed by the very industrial machinery he had corrupted and misused for personal gain. His body broken by the same forces he had unleashed through his ruthless pursuit of profit over human life and safety. It was a death that seemed almost biblical in its poetic justice, destroyed by his own greed, made manifest in twisted metal and uncontrolled steam. But the danger was far from over. A piece of metal debris launched by the explosion of the main flywheel came spinning directly toward Walter with enough force to decapitate him. Hazel threw herself forward, grabbing her father's arm and pulling him sideways with all her strength. They both crashed to the floor as the deadly projectile whistled past, where Walter's head had been just seconds before. Sheriff Pike, witnessing Vale's gruesome death and realizing his conspiracy had completely collapsed, along with any hope of the revenge he had craved for 20 years, made one final desperate attempt to salvage something from the disaster that would at least satisfy his personal hatred. He pressed his gun harder against Agnes's temple while backing toward what remained of the doorway, his eyes wild with the desperation of a man who had lost everything. "I'll still have satisfaction," he snarled through the chaos of venting steam and mechanical destruction. "If I can't hang Walter legally for crimes he didn't commit, I'll settle for killing those who helped expose the truth. At least his friends will join him in death." But Pike had underestimated the cumulative effect of the night's violent events on his own stability and judgment. His hands were shaking with exhaustion and strain. His attention was divided between multiple threats in the chaotic environment, and his footing was treacherous on the steam-slicked floor that had become as dangerous as ice. As he stepped backward toward the exit, his boot slipped on a patch of condensed steam that made the wooden planks as slippery as glass. His grip on Agnes loosened for just an instant, but it was enough time for her to demonstrate the courage that had brought her to Dakota Territory in the first place. She twisted free with desperate strength and dove aside, just as Takoda, despite his wounded shoulder that sent agony through his entire left side, tackled Pike with his remaining strength and determination. The two men grappled briefly on the treacherous floor that offered no secure footing, and their struggle complicated by the continuing chaos of the damaged machinery around them. Pike's desperation gave him temporary strength, but Takoda's warrior training and natural fighting instincts proved superior, even when handicapped by his injury. The confrontation ended when Pike's head struck the edge of a heavy iron support beam with a sound that cut through even the mechanical noise surrounding them. He crumpled unconscious to the steam-wet floor, his weapon sliding harmlessly across the wet planks to disappear into the mechanical debris that littered the building. The violent confrontation ended as suddenly as it had begun, leaving them standing amid the wreckage of Vale's industrial empire, while steam continued to hiss from the damaged boiler system. And dawn light filtered through the smoke-filled air, like hope breaking through storm clouds. The immediate aftermath unfolded with remarkable speed, as if the territory itself was eager to restore proper order after the night's revelations of corruption and violence. Judge Harrison Fletcher arrived in Crow's Landing with 2 federal marshals and a stenographer, summoned by Agnes's urgent telegrams and the mounting evidence of territorial law being systematically subverted by corporate interests that operated beyond local authority. Jonah Derry, despite his serious injuries that would require weeks of recovery, provided complete and detailed testimony about the conspiracy against Walter Whitcomb and the broader pattern of deliberate safety violations at the Silver Spur mine that endangered every worker's life on a daily basis. His survival and willingness to testify provided the crucial evidence needed to expose the full scope of Vale's criminal enterprise. Sheriff Pike, upon regaining consciousness in federal custody, confessed completely to his role in the elaborate scheme when faced with the overwhelming evidence against him. His confession included the personal motivation of seeking revenge against Walter for the military court-martial that had destroyed his Army career 20 years earlier. The depth of his hatred and the lengths to which he had gone to satisfy it shocked even experienced federal lawmen. Deputy Rafe Coulter, finally understanding the full scope of systematic corruption he had unknowingly supported through ignorance and misplaced loyalty to his superior, agreed to turn state's evidence and provide detailed testimony about other illegal activities throughout the territory. His cooperation provided crucial corroboration for the conspiracy charges and implicated several other corrupt officials who had been taking Vale's money. Silas Morrison's dangerous role as a double agent was officially recognized and praised by Judge Fletcher, who noted that his intelligence gathering and willingness to risk his life had been instrumental in exposing the full extent of Vale's criminal enterprise. Silas was granted complete immunity from prosecution in exchange for his testimony and his courageous efforts to protect innocent people at great personal risk. Judge Fletcher immediately issued comprehensive official orders that began restoring justice to the territory. Walter's execution was permanently canceled with full exoneration and official apology. The Silver Spur mine was closed, pending extensive federal safety inspection and compliance with all territorial regulations, and all debt contracts used to trap workers in economic bondage were declared null and void under territorial law. The judge's decisive action liberated dozens of honest men from a system of financial slavery, disguised as legitimate business practice, restoring their dignity and freedom to seek honest employment without the crushing debt burdens that had made them virtual prisoners in their own community. Jasper's emotional reunion with his brother Edwin brought tears of joy to everyone who witnessed the touching scene of family loyalty rewarded and brotherhood restored. Edwin and the other miners were completely freed from their crushing debt obligations and could seek honest employment elsewhere, or wait for the mine to reopen under proper federal oversight with genuine safety standards that protected lives over profits. The entire group worked together for several days to repair the damaged riverbank using shovels, sandbags, wheelbarrows, and backbreaking manual labor that left them exhausted but satisfied with their contribution to rebuilding what corruption had nearly destroyed. This practical reconstruction work symbolized their commitment to building a better future and preventing the kind of floods, both literal and metaphorical, that could devastate honest communities. Several weeks later, Sheriff Pike was transported east under heavy federal guard to face trial for conspiracy fraud, attempted murder, and systematic abuse of legal authority that had corrupted the entire territorial justice system. As the prison wagon prepared to depart Crow's Landing, permanently removing this symbol of corruption from their community, Pike made one final attempt to claim moral superiority over his captors and justify his decades of criminal behavior. I want you to understand something important before I leave this place forever," he said through the iron bars of the prison wagon, his voice carrying bitter pride despite his circumstances and the chains that bound his hands. "That first night at your cabin, when my men fired warning shots at you, and those Indians, I could have ordered them to kill all three of you outright, without witnesses. I saved your worthless lives by restricting them to intimidation rather than immediate murder." Hazel studied his weathered, defeated face with steady eyes that held wisdom far beyond her 16 years, wisdom earned through trials that had tested her courage and principles in ways she had never imagined possible. Her response carried the moral clarity of someone who had witnessed genuine justice triumph over sophisticated corruption through personal sacrifice and unwavering determination to do what was right, regardless of the cost. "You didn't spare me from mercy or kindness, Sheriff Pike," she replied with calm dignity that impressed everyone present, including the federal marshals who had seen many criminals attempt to justify their actions. "You needed me alive to witness Papa's execution and make it appear legitimate to outside authorities who might ask questions later. Your supposed mercy was just another calculated part of your conspiracy to commit murder through abuse of legal process. Your hatred made you cruel, but it also made you careless enough to leave the evidence we needed to expose your crimes." Pike had no response to that fundamental truth about the corrupt nature of his actions and motivations, his face showing that her words had struck home with devastating accuracy. Walter's health severely compromised by the harsh conditions of wrongful imprisonment and the tremendous physical and emotional strain of their final battle against systematic corruption continued declining. Throughout the spring months, despite the complete victory they had achieved against their enemies and the restoration of his good name, the ordeal had extracted a price his weakened body simply could not pay, and he grew noticeably frailer as warm weather returned to the Dakota Territory and life began renewing itself around them. Despite their triumph over injustice and the satisfaction of seeing corruption punish, the stress and deprivation of his imprisonment had taken an irreversible toll on his constitution that even Doc Felder's skilled medical care could not fully repair. He died peacefully in late April, surrounded by everyone who had risked their lives to prove his innocence and expose the conspiracy that had nearly claimed him, Hazel holding his hand while tears streamed down her face. Hosa offering traditional prayers that honored both Christian and Lakota beliefs about the journey to the next world. Takoda standing silent guard as warriors do for fallen comrades. Agnes documenting his final words for posterity. Doc Felder ensuring his comfort during the transition and all the friends who had stood with them during the darkest hours. "Tell them," Walter whispered to Agnes as his strength faded. "Tell them that justice isn't something that happens to us. It's something we make happen through our choices. Every generation has to choose between what's easy and what's right." They buried Walter Whitcomb on a hill overlooking the Ash River, where the eternal sound of flowing water would remind future generations of the principles he had defended with his life, and the courage required to stand against powerful corruption when ordinary people's lives and freedoms hung in the balance. The entire community attended the funeral, including many who had been too frightened to speak out during the crisis, but who now felt safe enough to honor a man who had died defending their interests. By summer's height, the Silver Spur mine reopened under strict federal oversight, with comprehensive safety standards that prioritized protecting workers' lives over maximizing corporate profits. New federal regulations required regular inspections by qualified engineers, proper timber supports that met territorial specifications, adequate ventilation systems to prevent gas buildup, and emergency procedures that would prevent the kind of preventable tragedies that had claimed so many lives in the past. Edwin Flynn was promoted to mine foreman based on his extensive underground experience, unquestioned integrity, and deep understanding of the safety requirements that would keep his fellow workers alive. He immediately hired his younger brother Jasper as his assistant supervisor. and together they implemented worker protection policies that made the Silver Spur mine a model of industrial safety throughout the Dakota Territory and beyond. Both brothers were finally completely free to work honestly without the burden of manufactured debt or fear of economic retaliation from corrupt supervisors earning wages that allowed them to support their families with dignity and plan for prosperous futures built on honest labor rather than exploitation and fear. Agnes Reed's newspaper gained territorial and even national recognition for its crucial role in exposing the Crow's Landing conspiracy and documenting how corporate corruption could systematically subvert local government institutions. She used her newfound influence and credibility to investigate and report on similar patterns of corruption in other frontier communities, inspiring honest citizens throughout the territory to stand up against powerful interests that preyed on their vulnerability and isolation. Her commitment to documented truth and fearless journalism had proven conclusively that even the most powerful corporate interests could be defeated by determined investigation, accurate reporting, and citizens willing to risk everything for the sake of justice and honest government. Winifred Carr upgraded her ferry operation substantially to handle the increased legitimate traffic as honest business and settlement returned to the region under federal protection and proper law enforcement. The crossing became a powerful symbol of cooperation between different communities rather than a barrier controlled by corrupt interests, with travelers from many backgrounds working together to maintain the essential transportation link that connected their shared future. Takoda's shoulder wound healed sufficiently for light work, though it bore permanent scars that would remind him daily of their battle against systematic corruption and the price that had been paid for victory. He and Hosa worked closely together to establish a formal tribal council that would ensure the water treaty's provisions would be respected and enforced by all future generations, with elected representatives from both Lakota and settler communities participating in decisions that affected their shared natural resources. The council met monthly at the ferry crossing where Lakota and settler children played together, while their parents discussed water rights, grazing boundaries, and trade agreements that benefited everyone. It was exactly the kind of cooperation Walter Whitcomb had envisioned when he signed the original treaty. Doc Felder established a proper, fully equipped medical practice in Crow's Landing, ensuring that injured miners, farmers, townspeople, and travelers would receive competent medical treatment without falling into the kind of debt bondage that had trapped Edwin Flynn and many other honest workers. His dedication to healing rather than profit had proven crucial in saving Jonah Derry's life and providing the medical testimony that helped expose the conspiracy through professional expertise that could not be dismissed or corrupted. Silas Morrison was appointed as the new Territorial Mine Safety Inspector, his unique experience as a double agent having demonstrated his absolute dedication to worker protection over corporate profit maximization. His brother's preventable death in an unsafe cave-in had given him both the moral authority and personal motivation to ensure such avoidable tragedies would never happen again under his oversight, and his inspection reports became models of thoroughness and honesty throughout the territory. Jonah Derry recovered completely from his injuries and resumed his position as mine foreman, working closely with Edwin Flynn to implement the safety standards that Vale had refused to approve despite their life-saving importance. His survival and willingness to testify had been essential in exposing the conspiracy and preventing future worker deaths through proper regulation and enforcement that put human life ahead of profit margins. The story reached its conclusion on a warm summer evening. As Hazel sat beside the gently flowing Ash River, watching the water move steadily toward its eventual junction with the mighty Missouri River that would carry it to distant oceans. The sunset painted the current in shades of gold and crimson that reflected the hard-won peace they had fought so courageously to achieve through sacrifice, determination, and unwavering commitment to truth and justice. Takoda joined her on the grassy bank, his healing shoulder allowing him to participate fully in the community work of building a better future for everyone who called this territory home. In the distance, smoke rose peacefully from Hosa's camp, where Lakota families continued their traditional seasonal activities along the shared waterway that Walter Whitcomb had died defending against corporate greed and corruption. Children from both communities played together near Winifred's Ferry, crossing their laughter, carrying across the water, as living proof that justice and cooperation could triumph permanently over greed and hatred, when ordinary people found the courage to stand together against powerful interests that sought to divide and exploit them for personal gain. Agnes had documented their entire story in a comprehensive series of detailed newspaper articles that were being reprinted throughout the Dakota Territory and beyond, inspiring other communities to organize effective resistance against corporate exploitation and fight for honest government that served citizens rather than wealthy special interests. Your father's sacrifice created this lasting peace. Takoda observed, simply watching the sunset's reflection dance on the water's surface like liquid fire that transformed the ordinary river into something magical and eternal. Hazel nodded thoughtfully, touching the small leather pouch that contained both versions of the water deed and her father's final letter expressing his love and hopes for her future. The water flows freely for everyone now, exactly as he always intended. No corporation or corrupt official will ever again be able to steal this gift from future generations who have the right to share the earth's bounty. She paused, remembering her father's words about choosing between what was easy and what was right. He taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified. Every person who stood with us proved that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose justice over safety. Behind them, the rebuilt town of Crow's Landing showed warm lights in honest windows, as families gathered for evening meals earned through legitimate labor rather than exploitation and corruption. The Silver Spur Mines whistle blew at shift's end, calling workers home to safety and fair wages rather than trapping them in dangerous conditions for corporate profit that ignored human cost. Ahead of them, the Ash River carried their inspiring story toward a future built on the solid foundation of justice rather than the shifting sands of corruption, where documented truth had proven stronger than elaborate conspiracy, and personal courage had permanently defeated institutional fear and intimidation. Children would grow up in both communities knowing the true story of how ordinary people had successfully challenged even the most powerful interests when they fought together with determination's intelligence and unwavering commitment to truth over convenience and principle over profit. The Water Treaty would protect both peoples for generations to come, and Walter Whitcomb's name would be remembered with honor as a man who chose integrity over safety and justice over personal survival, even unto death. The Ash River flowed on toward the distant horizon as it always had and always would, free and unbroken, carrying the eternal promise of shared prosperity for all who respected its gifts and honored the memory of those who had died defending the rights of future generations to live with dignity, justice, and hope in a world where courage and truth could still triumph over corruption and greed.